Modal verbs of advice are used, of course, for giving suggestions, recommendations, or guidance. In English, the most common modal verbs for giving advice are should, ought to, and had better. Should is the most commonly used modal verb of advice. It suggests a good idea, something that is recommended, but definitely not an obligation. How do we use it in the sentence? Here's how it goes. Subject plus should plus the base form of the verb. Here's an example. You should eat more vegetables to stay healthy. Another example. He should study harder if he wants to pass the exam. In the sentences that I mentioned, should gives an advice on what is recommended. Ought to. Ought to is similar to should, and it is also used to give advice, though it is slightly more formal. It also suggests that something is a good idea. How do we use it in a sentence? We have the subject plus the ought to plus the base form of the verb. Here are our examples. You ought to apologize if you've made a mistake. They ought to save more money for the future. Here, ought to conveys a sense of what is advisable, similar to should. Had better. Had better is used for strong advice, especially when there could be negative consequences if the advice is not followed. It's more urgent and implies that something bad might happen if the advice is ignored. How do we form had better in the sentence? So, that would be the subject plus had better plus the base form of the verb. Here are our examples. You had better take an umbrella. It looks like it's going to rain. She had better finish her work on time, or she could lose her job. In the sentences I mentioned, had better suggests that not following the advice could result in problems. Let's summarize it. Should is used for general advice or recommendation, which is softer. For example, you should get more sleep. Ought to is similar to should, but a bit more formal. Example, you ought to tell the truth. Had better. This one implies strong advice with a warning or a consequence. Example, you had better lock the door or someone might break in.